Free Japan Channel number 78. Today, May 12th, Monday, 2025. The time is 2 p.m. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? In Yokohama, it's cloudy today. Today's FGC topic is a great step for Ukraine ceasefire. Last week, in Moscow, the 80th Victory Day military parade was held on a large scale, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Brazilian President Lula and Slovak Prime Minister Fico, these world leaders participated in the event. At the same time, the other counterpart of the war, Ukraine. In Ukraine, there was also some kind of ceremony in which the British, France, German, Polish leaders attended along with President Zelensky, Ukraine president. Therefore, last week, there was effectively no military conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In addition, President Putin in Russia proclaimed that he would make 3-day ceasefire during this ceremony. 3-day. Surprisingly, today, 12th, is the day another 30-day ceasefire is now proposed. Of course, the two parties, Russian and Ukraine, are not so sure to accept this 30-day ceasefire proposal. But if they do, then it will be a great step for Ukraine ceasefire. It is 3 years that this Ukraine war was waged between these two countries, and some 100,000 soldiers, young soldiers, were dead in the course of this war on both sides. The US President Donald Trump always said that he would mourn these young soldiers who died there. And President Trump also added that he would put an end to this war, stupid war, in 24 hours. The inauguration of Mr. Trump was January. Today is May, therefore, 4 months have passed, and still, the ceasefire agreement was not concluded. However, this time, when the 30-day ceasefire is implemented, then it would be a permanent kind of ceasefire. In fact, Ukraine President Zelensky announced that he would want to meet Russian President Putin in Istanbul, in Turkey, on 15th. 15th means Thursday. Today is Monday, therefore, 4 days later, Zelensky wants to meet Putin in Turkey. I would say that Putin would not go to Istanbul on this proposal. However, this call from Zelensky to Putin is very important for peace agreement. I think that US President Trump is now moving behind this scene. Donald Trump has been very famous for hating war. Trump always says that in his previous official term, there was no war. So from 2016 to 2020, then in Biden administration, Ukraine war broke out, which Donald Trump always condemned during his presidential campaign. And then Trump became president again. Now, it is his job to stop this war. Ukraine couldn't have fought this war alone. Of course, it couldn't. Thanks to the help, so financial help, military help from the West. The West means from the US and Europe. Ukraine could wage a war. It means if the US says stop this war, then Ukraine cannot continue this war alone. In other words, Ukraine war was a kind of war between Russia and the United States. Ukraine was only an arena, only a place for the war. And the young soldiers of Ukraine died. It was very futile for these Ukrainian young soldiers to die in this war because, in fact, this war was waged between Russia and the United States, not Russia and Ukraine. Sorry to say. This time, a great step was made for the ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, which we are now so craving for. In 1 or 2 weeks, there would be some announcement from Moscow. President Putin will say something about this call from President Zelensky. The international situation will change according to this Putin's remark. However, if Putin says something positive for the ceasefire, the war will soon come to an end, and the stock market all around the world would soar. The end of this war would influence all the people around the world. We have to pay attention to it. Thank you.